Chapter 1. The Homecoming. Lance Daly stood in his driveway, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel of his black Ford pickup. 5 years. 5 goddamn years since his daughter Isabel had vanished without a trace from their suburban Minnesota home. The police had given up after 2 years, labeling her a runaway despite Lance's insistence that something was wrong. His wife Candace had seemed almost relieved when the search efforts dwindled, claiming they needed to move on and accept reality. But Lance never stopped looking. He'd hired 3 different private investigators, followed countless dead-end leads, and driven thousands of miles chasing shadows. The obsession had cost him his construction business, most of his savings, and according to Candace, their marriage. She'd filed for separation 6 months ago, though they still shared the house, an arrangement that suited Lance's need to keep watching her. The call had come at 3:47 a.m. Minneapolis Police Department. They'd found a young woman matching Isabel's description wandering downtown, disoriented and malnourished. No ID, but she'd given them his name and address. Lance had broken every speed limit getting there, his heart hammering as he identified the hollow-eyed girl who barely resembled the vibrant 16-year-old who'd disappeared. Isabel was 21 now, rail-thin with haunted eyes and scars on her wrists that made Lance's vision blur with rage. She'd clung to him in the police station, whispering "Daddy" over and over while refusing to speak to anyone else. The officers had questions. Where had she been? Who took her? Why return now? But Isabel had gone silent, pressing her face against Lance's chest. Now, as he helped her from the truck, Lance noticed how she flinched at sudden movements and kept glancing over her shoulder. Someone had done this to his little girl. Someone had stolen 5 years of her life, and Lance would find them. He'd learned patience during his construction days, knew that the strongest foundations required time and careful planning. Whoever was responsible would pay in ways they couldn't imagine. "Is Mom home?" Isabel asked, her voice barely above a whisper as they approached the front door. "She's inside," Lance replied, studying his daughter's face. Something flickered in her eyes. Fear? Anger? "Isabel, baby, what happened to you? Where have you been?" But Isabel had gone rigid, staring at the house like it was a tomb. "We need to talk first, Daddy. Alone. Before we go inside." Lance knelt beside her, his massive frame making her look even more fragile. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm here now. I'll protect you." Tears spilled down Isabel's cheeks. "You don't understand. The reason I disappeared, the reason I came back." She gripped his arms with surprising strength. "Mom knows why I left. She's been lying to you for years." The front door opened before Lance could respond. Candace appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair perfect despite the early hour, wearing the silk robe Lance had bought her for their anniversary 3 years ago. She'd kept herself in shape at 45, still the attractive woman he'd married. But her beauty had grown cold over the years, especially after Isabel's disappearance. "Oh my God," Candace gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. "Isabel? Is that really you?" Isabel pressed closer to Lance, her breathing shallow. "Daddy, please. We need to leave. Now." But Candace was already approaching, arms outstretched. "Baby girl, we've been so worried. Where have you been? Are you hurt? Stay away from me," Isabel said, the words sharp and clear. Candace froze, confusion flickering across her features. "Honey, I'm your mother. I've missed you so much." "You're a liar," Isabel said, her voice growing stronger. "And I'm going to tell him everything." Lance felt the temperature drop between the 3 of them. Candace's expression shifted, the maternal warmth replaced by something calculating. "Isabel, sweetheart, you've been through trauma. You're confused." "I'm not confused about what I saw," Isabel interrupted. "I'm not confused about why I had to run. And I'm not confused about who you really are." Lance stood slowly, his eyes moving between his wife and daughter. 22 years of marriage had taught him to read Candace's tells. The way she touched her neck when nervous. How her smile became brittle under pressure. Right now, she looked like a woman with secrets. "What's she talking about, Candace?" Lance asked quietly. "She's obviously been brainwashed by whoever took her," Candace said, but her voice lacked conviction. "We should get her to a hospital, have her checked." "I wasn't taken," Isabel said firmly. "I ran. I had to run because of what you did. What you both did." "Both?" Lance's voice was dangerously soft. Isabel nodded toward the street. A silver BMW sat parked 3 houses down, engine running. Even in the dim streetlight, Lance could make out a figure behind the wheel. "Byron's waiting for me to come out," Isabel said. "He thinks I'm going to keep quiet like before. But I'm done protecting you, Mom. I'm done living with what I know." Byron Weiss. Lance knew the name. One of Candace's co-workers at the insurance agency where she'd worked for the past 8 years. A smooth-talking claims adjuster with perfect teeth and expensive suits. Lance had always found something oily about the man, the way he looked at Candace during company parties. "You're talking nonsense," Candace said, but she was backing toward the house. "Byron's a family friend. He's your lover," Isabel said flatly. "And 5 years ago, I saw you kill someone together." Chapter 2, Revelations. The silence that followed Isabel's words was deafening. Lance felt something cold and violent unfurling in his chest, a darkness he'd kept carefully contained for 48 years. He'd learned early in life that angry men who couldn't control themselves ended up in prison or worse. His father had been such a man, violent, unpredictable, ultimately destroyed by his own rage. Lance had sworn to be different, to think before acting, to channel his fury into purpose. But looking at his wife's pale face and his daughter's trembling form, that control was fraying. "Inside," he said quietly. "Now." Candace opened her mouth to protest, but something in Lance's expression stopped her. They moved through the front door like a funeral procession. Lance locked the deadbolt behind them, noting how Isabel flinched at the sound. The living room felt different now, contaminated by secrets. Lance had built most of the furniture himself, the oak coffee table, the entertainment center, the bookshelves. This had been their sanctuary, their family home. Now it felt like a crime scene. "Start talking," Lance said, settling into his recliner. He kept his voice calm, but his hands were clenched into fists. Isabel perched on the edge of the couch, as far from Candace as possible. It was September 15th, 2019. "You were in Chicago for that big hotel project, remember? You were supposed to be gone all week." Lance remembered. The Marriott renovation that had been his company's biggest contract. He'd driven home unexpectedly on Tuesday night, wanting to surprise Candace for their anniversary. "I came home early from school because I was sick," Isabel continued. "When I walked in, I heard voices in the basement. Mom's voice and someone else's. A man. He was screaming." Candace had gone white. "Isabel, please." "Shut up," Lance said softly. His wife's mouth snapped closed. Isabel's voice grew stronger as she continued. "I went to the basement door and looked down. Mom was there with Byron, and there was a man tied to a chair. He was hurt, bleeding from his face. Byron was holding a knife." Lance's mind raced. The basement had been his workshop before Isabel disappeared. Soundproof, isolated, with a drain in the concrete floor for washing equipment. It would have been perfect for. "Who was the man?" he asked. "His name was Dennis Elliott," Isabel said. "I found out later he was an investigator Byron hired to follow someone. But Dennis figured out what Byron was really up to, the insurance fraud, the fake claims. He was going to expose everything. So they killed him," Lance said. "It wasn't a question." Isabel nodded. "They made it look like an accident. A car crash out on Highway 35. But I saw them dump his body in Byron's car trunk first. They were going to stage the whole thing." Lance turned to Candace, who was staring at the floor. "How long?" he asked. "How long what?" she whispered. "How long have you been fucking him?" Candace's head snapped up. "Lance, please let me explain." "How long?" 3 years, she admitted. "It started after Isabel began high school. You were always working, always gone on jobs. So you decided to become a murderer? It wasn't supposed to happen like that." Candace's composure cracked. Dennis was blackmailing Byron. He wanted money to keep quiet about the insurance thing. But he got greedy, kept demanding more. Byron said we had to stop him. "We?" Lance's voice dropped to a whisper. "You helped plan it." I was there. I didn't know Byron was going to." "You were there when he tortured the man," Isabel interrupted. "You held the phone while Byron recorded him confessing to crimes he didn't commit. You helped clean up the blood." Lance stood slowly, his 6'4" frame casting a long shadow. 25 years in construction had left him broad-shouldered and powerful, with hands that could crush concrete blocks. Candace shrank back into the couch. "What happened next?" he asked Isabel. "They saw me," she said. "On the stairs. Mom screamed, and Byron came after me with the knife. I ran, got to my room, and locked the door. But I could hear them arguing about what to do with me." Lance's jaw tightened. They threatened you. Byron wanted to make sure I couldn't talk. Mom convinced him there was another way. She said they'd make it look like I ran away. Teen girl having problems at home, history of depression, family issues. The police would assume I was just another runaway statistic. But you actually did run away, Lance said. Isabel nodded. I heard them planning it. How they'd stage my room, what story they'd tell you. Byron said if I ever came back, if I ever talked, they'd kill you too. Make it look like a suicide. Grieving father couldn't handle losing his daughter. The room felt like it was closing in. Lance looked at Candace. This woman he'd shared a bed with for over 2 decades, who'd helped him grieve their missing daughter while knowing exactly where she was. The betrayal was so complete, so monstrous, that for a moment he couldn't breathe. Where have you been for 5 years? He asked Isabel gently. Different places. Shelters, mostly. Sometimes I stayed with people who didn't ask questions. I kept moving, used fake names. I got a job at a diner in Wisconsin, saved money. I've been watching from a distance, waiting for the right time. Why now? Isabel's eyes hardened with a maturity that broke Lance's heart. Because Byron's getting careless. He killed another investigator 3 months ago, Pete Kruger. Made it look like a robbery. But this time someone saw him leaving the scene. The police are asking questions. Lance turned back to Candace. How many people have you two murdered? Just the 2, Candace said quickly. And I never actually. You accessory to murder, Lance said. You helped cover it up. You drove our daughter away from her home and let me think she was dead. Tears were streaming down Candace's face now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you, but Byron said. Byron said what? He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd frame you for the murders. Plant evidence. Make it look like you killed Dennis. He had it all planned out. Lance absorbed this information with the same methodical approach he used for construction projects. Foundation first, then framework, then details. The foundation here was simple. His wife was a killer and a liar. His daughter had been living in terror for 5 years. And somewhere out there, Byron Weiss was waiting for Isabel to emerge from this house. The framework was equally clear. Byron and Candace had gotten away with murder twice. They destroyed his family and stolen his daughter's childhood. They deserved to pay, but not through the legal system. That would take years, with no guarantee of justice. No, this required a more personal approach. Isabel, he said, his voice calm again. I need you to go to your room and pack a bag. We're leaving. Where are we going? She asked. Lance smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Somewhere safe, while I take care of some unfinished business. Lance, please, Candace begged. We can work this out. I'll testify against Byron. Help put him away. You're going to do exactly what I tell you to do, Lance said quietly. And if you deviate from my instructions even slightly, I'll make sure the world knows what kind of monster you really are before I kill you myself. Candace went very still. In 22 years of marriage, she'd never heard Lance speak with such cold certainty. What do you want me to do? She whispered. Lance walked to the window and peered through the blinds. The silver BMW was still there, engine running. Byron was probably getting impatient, wondering what was taking so long. First, Lance said, you're going to call him. Tell him everything went fine, that Isabel is keeping quiet, and that you'll meet him tomorrow night to discuss next steps. And then, Lance's smile widened. Then you're going to help me destroy him. Chapter 3, The Setup. Lance had always been a planner. In construction, you learned early that the smallest oversight could bring down an entire building. Measure twice, cut once. Check the foundation before adding weight. Account for weather, soil conditions, human error. These principles had served him well in business, and they would serve him even better in revenge. While Isabel packed her essentials, Lance sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad, sketching out what he privately called the demolition project. Candace huddled in the corner, her phone in her trembling hands, waiting for his signal to call Byron. Before you make that call, Lance said, not looking up from his notes, I need to understand the whole picture. How many insurance claims has Byron filed fraudulently? I don't know exactly, Candace whispered. Dozens, maybe more. He's been doing it for years. Fake accidents, staged thefts, inflated damage reports. And your role? I processed the claims, made sure they got approved quickly, buried any red flags in the system. Lance nodded, still writing. Who else knows? Nobody. Byron's very careful. He only uses clients who pay cash, people who won't ask questions. What about his family? Candace looked confused. His family. Is he married? Kids? People who matter to him. He was married. Divorced 2 years ago. No kids. His ex-wife moved to California. Lance made another note. A man with no family ties was harder to control, but it also meant fewer innocent bystanders. What about his finances? Assets? He's got money hidden offshore. Cayman Islands accounts, I think. The insurance money doesn't go to his regular bank. He's got a whole separate system set up. Properties? A house on the lake. Expensive cars. He's always talking about buying a boat. Lance looked up for the first time since starting his interrogation. Where does he think you are right now? I told him I was handling Isabel, making sure she understood the consequences of talking. And what does he expect to happen next? Candace's voice was barely audible. He wants to move her somewhere more permanent. He's been pressuring me to convince Isabel to go with him voluntarily. Says he's got a place lined up. Lance felt that cold rage building again. He wants to kill her. I don't know. Maybe. He talks about contingency plans. Lance stood and walked to Candace, who shrank back as he approached. But instead of striking her, he knelt down until they were eye level. Here's what's going to happen, he said quietly. You're going to call Byron and tell him Isabel is cooperating. You're going to arrange to meet him tomorrow night at his lake house. You're going to tell him you have a plan to handle the Isabel situation permanently, but you need his help. What kind of plan? You're going to suggest that Isabel needs to disappear again. But this time, instead of running away, she'll have an accident. Something that can't be traced back to either of you. Candace's eyes widened. He'll want details. You'll tell him you've been thinking about it for weeks. Isabel called you a month ago, threatening to come forward. You convinced her to meet with you first to talk things through. But now you realize she'll never stay quiet. The only solution is to eliminate the threat. And the accident? Lance's smile was arctic. You'll suggest Isabel should take a drive with Byron. Somewhere remote. The car goes off the road, into the lake. Tragic accident. Troubled young woman. Finally comes home after 5 years, but can't handle the pressure. Takes her own life. Candace was shaking now. He'll go for it. Byron likes simple solutions. I'm counting on it. Lance returned to his seat. Make the call. Candace dialed with unsteady fingers. The phone rang 3 times before Byron's smooth voice answered. Well, how did it go? She's here, Candace said, forcing steadiness into her voice. She's not going to talk. You're sure? She seemed pretty determined when she was younger. I handled it. But Byron, we need to meet. Tomorrow night. There's something we need to discuss. A pause. What kind of something? The Isabel problem. I think I have a solution, but I need your help. Can't we discuss it now? Not over the phone. Meet me at your place tomorrow at 9. And Byron, this has to be the last time. I can't keep doing this. Another pause, longer this time. All right. 9 o'clock. And Candace? Make sure you're not being followed. The line went dead. Candace looked at Lance with a mixture of fear and confusion. What happens tomorrow night? She asked. Tomorrow night, Byron Weiss learns what happens to people who threaten my family. Isabel appeared in the doorway, a small duffel bag in her hands. She looked young and fragile, but Lance could see steel in her eyes that hadn't been there before. 5 years of survival had hardened his little girl into something stronger. Daddy, what about the police? If we have evidence. The police will want testimony, witnesses, proof that can stand up in court, Lance said. That takes time. Lawyers, appeals, deals. And there's always a chance they walk free. So we're taking justice into our own hands. Lance studied his daughter's face. I'm taking justice into my own hands. You're going somewhere safe while I clean up this mess. No, Isabel said firmly. I've been running for 5 years. I'm done running. If you're doing this, I want to help. Absolutely not. Dad, I know Byron better than you do. I know how he thinks, how he reacts under pressure. You need me. Lance wanted to refuse, to protect Isabel from any further trauma. But looking at her now, he realized she wasn't the frightened 16-year-old who had fled this house. She was a survivor, and survivors understood that sometimes you had to fight back. What did you have in mind? He asked carefully. Isabel set down her bag and joined them at the table. Byron has a weakness. He's paranoid, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else, especially women. If we can convince him that he's in control of the situation, he'll make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? He'll want to gloat, to explain how clever he's been. And while he's talking, he won't be watching his back. Lance considered this. You want to wear a wire? Better than that. Isabel said, pulling out a small device Lance didn't recognize. I've been preparing for this confrontation for 2 years. I know we'll need evidence, but not for the police. For leverage. What is that? Video camera. High definition, wireless transmission. I can hide it anywhere, stream the footage to a secure server. Even if something happens to the camera, the evidence survives. Lance felt a surge of pride mixed with sadness. His daughter had been forced to grow up fast, to learn skills no young woman should need. But she'd survived, and now she was ready to fight back. All right, he said. But we do this my way. No unnecessary risks, no heroics. Byron and Candace are going to pay for what they've done, but we're all walking away from this alive. Understood. Isabel nodded. Candace just stared at them both, finally beginning to understand that she wasn't a player in this game anymore. She was a pawn, and pawns were expendable. One more thing, Lance said, standing. Candace, you're going to write out everything. Names, dates, amounts, accounts. Every detail of Byron's operation and your involvement. Consider it insurance. Insurance against what? Lance's expression was stone cold. Insurance against me deciding that killing you both is simpler than just killing him. As night fell over their suburban street, Lance began gathering the tools he would need for tomorrow's work. He'd built his reputation on solid foundations and careful craftsmanship. Now it was time to build something different. A trap that would crush Byron Weiss as thoroughly as he'd crushed Lance's family. The demolition was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Lake House. Byron Weiss lived like a man who'd never known real consequence. His lake house sat on 12 pristine acres, with a private dock and boat launch that had cost more than most people's homes. The house itself was a monument to excess. Floor-to-ceiling windows, imported stone, a wine cellar that could supply a small restaurant. It was the kind of place that announced wealth without taste, success without substance. Lance had been watching the property for 6 hours, noting the security cameras, the motion sensors, the single access road that could be easily blocked. Byron felt safe here, isolated from the world he'd been manipulating. That sense of security would be his downfall. At 8:47 p.m., Lance watched through binoculars as Byron's silver BMW pulled into the circular driveway. The man stepped out looking exactly as Lance remembered, tall, lean, with prematurely gray hair that he probably thought made him look distinguished. He wore a silk shirt and Italian shoes that cost more than Lance's truck payment. 13 minutes later, Candace arrived in her white Lexus. She dressed carefully for this meeting, Lance noted. Low-cut blouse, short skirt, heels that clicked on the stone walkway. Playing the role of devoted conspirator and lover. Even now, facing the destruction of everything, she was still performing. Lance checked his watch, 9 p.m. exactly. Time to crash the party. He'd parked his truck a quarter-mile down the access road, hidden behind a stand of pine trees. The walk to the house took him through thick woods, ground soft with decades of fallen leaves. He moved quietly despite his size, another skill learned during years of hunting with his father before the old man's anger had consumed everything good between them. The lake house was designed for entertaining, which meant extensive outdoor lighting and large windows. Lance could see into the main living area, where Byron and Candace sat on opposite ends of a leather couch, wine glasses in hand. They looked like actors playing their parts badly. Too much tension, too much forced casualness. Isabel was already in position. She'd arrived an hour earlier, using the spare key Candace had provided years ago when she'd been asked to water plants during Byron's vacations. The video camera was hidden in the entertainment center, positioned to capture the entire conversation. Isabel herself was concealed in Byron's study, watching through the partially open door. Lance activated his earpiece, a short-range radio system Isabel had procured along with her other surveillance equipment. His daughter's voice came through clearly. "They're discussing you, Dad. Byron's suspicious about why Mom wants to handle this personally. Can you hear everything?" "Crystal clear. The camera is recording. Byron just asked Mom if she's sure you don't suspect anything." Lance smiled grimly. Byron's paranoia was showing, which meant he was already off balance. Good. Lance approached the house from the lake side, where shadows were deepest. The back door was unlocked. Candace had seen to that. He slipped inside and moved through the dark kitchen, following the sound of voices. "Has to look completely natural," Candace was saying. "No signs of struggle, no evidence that anyone else was involved." "And you're certain Isabel will cooperate?" Byron asked. She seemed different when I saw her earlier. More determined. She's scared, Candace lied smoothly. 5 years of running has broken her down. She just wants this to be over. Lance positioned himself in the hallway adjacent to the living room, close enough to intervene if needed, but still hidden. Through his earpiece, Isabel's voice was steady. Byron's walking to the window now. He's looking toward the driveway. I still don't like this, Byron said, returning to his seat. Maybe we should reconsider the whole approach. There are other ways to ensure silence, such as permanent ways. Clean, efficient, untraceable. Candace set down her wine glass. You mean killing her? I mean solving the problem definitively. Isabel is a loose end, Candace. Loose ends have a way of unraveling everything. Lance felt his jaw tighten. Hearing Byron discuss murdering Isabel so casually, like a business decision, made that careful control start to slip again. She's just a girl, Candace said, though Lance detected something performative in her tone. She's a witness to murder, Byron corrected. And now she's a legal adult who can testify without parental consent. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life wondering when she'll decide to come forward? Through the earpiece. Dad, Byron just moved to his desk. He's opening a drawer. Lance tensed. What's he getting? I can't see from here. Wait. He's walking back with something in his hand. This might help you understand the urgency, Byron said, holding up what looked like a photograph. I had a friend in the police department run Isabel's description through missing persons databases. She's been using at least 3 different identities over the past 5 years. Sarah Chun, Maria Santos, Jennifer Walsh. Candace leaned forward. How is that possible? Fake IDs aren't hard to get if you know the right people. But here's the interesting part. One of those identities has a criminal record. Shoplifting mostly. Small stuff. But enough to establish a pattern of instability. What are you getting at? Byron's smile was predatory. I'm getting at reasonable doubt. If Isabel comes forward with her story, we paint her as a disturbed young woman with a history of mental illness and petty crime. We suggest she's making up stories for attention, trying to blame her family for her own failures. Candace paused. That's actually brilliant. It gets better. I've been documenting your husband's obsessive behavior since Isabel disappeared. The private investigators, the late-night drives to search sites, the drinking problem he developed. Lance's hands clenched into fists. Drinking problem? He'd had a few too many on rough nights, but it had never interfered with his work or his search for Isabel. We frame Lance as an unstable man who couldn't accept his daughter's choices, Byron continued. When Isabel finally comes home, he snaps. Murder-suicide. Tragic end to a family destroyed by secrets. You want to kill Lance too? Candace's voice was small. I want to eliminate all the variables, Byron said. Lance, Isabel, anyone else who might ask uncomfortable questions. Clean slate, fresh start. Through the earpiece, Isabel's voice was ice cold. Dad, I've heard enough. Let's end this. Lance stepped into the living room. I couldn't agree more, he said quietly. Chapter 5, Confessions. Byron's wine glass shattered against the hardwood floor. Candace gasped and pressed herself back into the couch cushions. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the tick of Byron's expensive grandfather clock and the soft lapping of lake water against the dock outside. Lance, Byron said, his voice carefully controlled despite the obvious shock. This is unexpected, is it? Lance moved into the room with deliberate calm, his hands visible and empty. You've been planning to kill me for weeks, apparently. I thought I should drop by and discuss the details. Byron's right hand drifted toward his jacket pocket. Lance noticed the movement and smiled. I wouldn't, Lance said softly. You're already outnumbered, and I guarantee you're outgunned. Outnumbered. Byron looked around the room frantically. It's just you. Actually, it's not. Isabel stepped out of the study, Byron's service pistol, the one he kept in his desk drawer, held competently in both hands. She'd learned to shoot during her years on the run, Lance realized with a mixture of pride and sadness. Hello, Byron, Isabel said. Miss me? Byron's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally calculation. Lance could almost see the man's mind working, searching for angles, advantages, some way to regain control of the situation. Isabel, Byron said, forcing a smile. You look, well, I'm glad you came home safely. Are you? Because 5 minutes ago you were planning to murder me and frame my father for it. You misunderstood. I understood perfectly. Just like I understood 5 years ago when you tortured Dennis Elliott to death in our basement. Byron glanced at Candace, who was staring at the floor. Candace, explain to them. Explain what? Lance interrupted. How you've been fucking my wife for 3 years. How you turned her into an accessory to murder. How you drove my daughter out of her own home. I can see you're upset, Byron said, his tone shifting to the reasonable cadence of a man accustomed to talking his way out of trouble. But there are facts here you don't understand. Complexities. Enlighten me. Byron straightened his silk shirt and seemed to regain some composure. Dennis Elliott wasn't an innocent investigator. He was a blackmailer who'd been extorting money from insurance companies for years. He had files on dozens of fraudulent claims, not just mine, but legitimate cases that he'd helped fabricate evidence for. So you killed him. I defended myself. Dennis came to my office with a gun, demanding more money. We struggled, the gun went off. Everything after that was just damage control. Lance looked at Isabel. Is that how you remember it? He's lying, Isabel said flatly. Dennis was tied to a chair. Byron tortured him for hours, trying to get him to reveal who else he'd talked to about the insurance fraud. When Dennis wouldn't break, Byron killed him. She's traumatized, Byron said quickly. Memory can play tricks. I have video, Isabel said. The room went dead silent. What? Byron whispered. Isabel reached into her jacket and pulled out a small digital camera. I recorded everything through a crack in the basement door. 5 years of therapy helped me understand that I needed evidence if I ever wanted justice. Byron's face had gone pale. That's impossible. You were 16. You ran away. I was 16, but I wasn't stupid. And I didn't run away until after I'd hidden the camera and retrieved the memory card. Lance felt something like awe as he watched his daughter. She'd been planning this confrontation for years, accumulating evidence, learning skills, waiting for the right moment. She was more like him than he'd ever realized. Show him, Lance said. Isabel scrolled through the camera's memory and held up the small screen. Even from across the room, Lance could see the grainy but unmistakable footage of Byron holding a knife while a bound man screamed. You little bitch, Byron snarled, his mask finally slipping. You should have stayed gone. Maybe, Isabel said. But then I would have missed watching you burn. Byron lunged for her, moving faster than Lance had expected. But Isabel was ready. She stepped aside and brought the pistol down hard on Byron's temple. He dropped to his knees, blood running down his face. Stay down, Isabel said, her voice steady as stone. Lance turned to Candace, who was hyperventilating on the couch. Your turn to talk. I can't, Candace stammered. Start with Pete Kruger, Lance said. The second investigator you two killed. Candace's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Byron groaned and tried to sit up, but Isabel pressed the gun barrel against his neck. Pete was getting too close, Candace finally said. He'd found connections between Dennis's death and some of Byron's insurance claims. Byron said we had to stop him before he went to the police. So you lured him somewhere and killed him. I didn't kill anyone, Candace protested. I provided alibis. I made sure Byron had explanations for where he was. Accessory to murder, Lance said. That's life in prison, Candace. Assuming you live long enough to see trial. Byron laughed weakly from the floor. You think you've won something here? You think this ends with me? I've got insurance policies you can't imagine. Such as evidence caches, dead man switches, people who know to look for certain signals. Byron struggled to his knees, blood still dripping from his head wound. If I disappear, if something happens to me, every detail of your precious Candace's involvement becomes public record. Lance studied Byron's face, looking for tells. The man was desperate, grasping for leverage, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he wasn't entirely bluffing. What kind of evidence caches? Lance asked. Photos, videos, financial records. Everything needed to prove Candace planned and participated in multiple murders. Byron's smile was ugly. Kill me, and she dies too. Let me walk away, and maybe I keep my mouth shut. Or, Isabel said quietly, we could just kill you both. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lance looked at his daughter, 21 years old, holding a gun on the man who destroyed her childhood, discussing murder with the same tone she might use to order coffee. 5 years of survival had changed her in ways he was only beginning to understand. That's one option, Lance agreed. But I've got a better idea. Byron and Candace both looked at him with desperate hope. "You're going to confess," Lance said. "To everything. On camera. In detail. And then you're going to disappear." "Disappear how?" Byron asked. Lance's smile was arctic. "Permanently." Chapter 6. The Confession. Lance had learned the value of documentation during his construction years. Inspectors wanted records, clients demanded receipts, insurance companies required proof. Paper trails protected everyone, except when they didn't. Tonight, he would create a different kind of record, one that would serve justice instead of bureaucracy. Isabel repositioned her camera while Lance secured Byron and Candace to kitchen chairs with zip ties he'd brought in his toolkit. Byron kept testing his restraints with the methodical persistence of a man who'd clearly been in similar situations before. Candace just sat staring at her hands, tears streaming down her face. "This is how it's going to work," Lance explained, pulling up a third chair to face them. "You're going to tell me everything. Every detail of your insurance fraud operation. Every murder. Every crime. And you're going to do it on camera." "And if we refuse?" Byron asked. Lance gestured toward Isabel, who was adjusting camera angles with professional efficiency. "Then my daughter starts uploading video of you torturing Dennis Elliott to every social media platform she can find, along with your full name, address, and place of employment. That won't hold up in court." "Who said anything about court?" Lance interrupted. "I'm not interested in trials and lawyers and appeals. I'm interested in justice. Street justice." Byron's face tightened with understanding. "You're talking about vigilante murder. I'm talking about pest control." Lance turned to Candace, who flinched under his gaze. "You want to go first? Tell me about Dennis Elliott." "I already told you. You told me lies. Now tell me the truth." Candace looked desperately at Byron, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. Lance caught the exchange and filed it away. Even now, even bound and facing death, they were still coordinating their stories. Dennis was investigating Byron's insurance claims. Candace began slowly. He'd found patterns, irregularities in the documentation. Byron tried to buy him off, but Dennis wanted more money than we could afford. "So you decided to kill him?" Byron decided. I went along with it." "Details," Lance said flatly. Candace took a shaky breath. "Byron lured Dennis to our house. Told him he had evidence of other fraudulent claims. Bigger fish than just Byron's operation. Dennis came to the basement to see the files. And Byron was waiting. He hit Dennis with a hammer, knocked him unconscious. When Dennis woke up, he was tied to the chair." Lance glanced at Isabel, who was recording everything with steady hands. His daughter's face was stone, but he could see the pain in her eyes as Candace described the events that had destroyed her childhood. "What happened next?" Lance asked. Byron wanted to know who else Dennis had talked to, how much the insurance companies knew, whether there were other investigators working the case. Candace's voice was getting smaller. Dennis wouldn't answer. Said he'd rather die than help Byron cover up more crimes. So Byron tortured him. For hours. Cut him, burned him with cigarettes, broke his fingers. Dennis kept saying he was just doing his job, that all he wanted was to expose the truth. Byron spoke for the first time since they'd started recording. He was a self-righteous prick who thought he was better than everyone else. He was an honest man trying to stop criminals, Isabel said quietly. "Like you." Byron laughed bitterly. "Honest." Dennis was skimming money from his employer, taking bribes from claimants to falsify reports. He was as dirty as anyone. "That doesn't justify torturing him to death," Lance said. "Doesn't it? In my experience, everyone has a price. Everyone has secrets." Dennis's secret was that he was a hypocrite who got greedy. Lance stood and walked behind Byron's chair. "What's your secret, Byron?" "What do you mean?" "Everyone has one, according to you. What's yours?" Byron was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its polished confidence. "I like hurting people. Always have. Even as a kid, I'd find ways to cause pain without getting caught. Small animals at first, then bigger ones. Eventually, I realized I could make a career out of it." "Insurance fraud?" "Insurance fraud was just the money. The real reward was finding people at their most vulnerable, after accidents, house fires, medical emergencies, and deciding whether they deserved help or deserved to suffer more." Lance felt something cold settle in his stomach. "How many people have you destroyed?" "Destroyed? Hundreds. Killed? Just Dennis and Pete. And you enjoyed it." "I enjoyed having the power. Life and death decisions. Playing God." Lance looked at Candace. And you fell in love with this monster. I didn't know, Candace whispered. Not at first. Byron was charming, successful, attentive. Everything you weren't. When did you find out what he really was? The night Dennis died. I saw what Byron was capable of, and I was terrified. But by then I was involved. He said if I tried to leave, he'd frame me for everything. So you stayed and helped him kill Pete Kruger. Candace nodded miserably. Pete was getting close to the truth. Byron said it was him or us. How did you do it? I lured Pete to a meeting. Told him I had evidence about Dennis's death. Byron was waiting in the parking garage where we were supposed to meet. He shot Pete and made it look like a robbery. Lance walked back to his chair and sat down. Anything else you want to confess while we're recording? Byron and Candace exchanged another look. There was more, Lance realized. Something they were still holding back. The night Isabel disappeared, Byron said finally. We didn't just threaten her. We made her watch. Watch what? We had another problem. A claims adjuster named Tomas Pruitt who was asking questions about some of our older cases. We brought him to the house that night to resolve the situation. Isabel's face went white. There was a third murder? Tomas didn't die, Byron said. We just wanted him to understand the consequences of continued investigation. So we showed him Dennis's video. Made him watch the whole thing. Then we explained what would happen to him and his family if he didn't back off. But Isabel saw this, Lance said. Isabel saw us with Tomas. She heard us threatening to kill his wife and kids if he didn't cooperate. She realized we weren't just criminals. We were monsters who would hurt innocent people to protect ourselves. Lance turned to Isabel. Is that why you ran? Not just because they threatened you, but because you realized they'd keep killing? Isabel nodded, tears finally coming. I couldn't let them hurt anyone else because of what I knew. So I disappeared, hoping that would end it. But it didn't end it, Byron said with satisfaction. Because here we all are, 5 years later, and the body count is still rising. Lance stood up slowly. The confession was complete. Byron and Candace had detailed their crimes, admitted their guilt, and revealed the full scope of their evil. The video would serve as evidence if needed, but Lance had no intention of turning it over to authorities. Isabel, he said quietly, take the camera and go wait in the truck. Dad, go. Now. Isabel hesitated, then gathered her equipment and left through the back door. Lance waited until he heard the door close, then turned back to his captives. Any last words? He asked. Byron laughed. You think you're the good guy in this story? You're about to commit double murder, Lance. That makes you just like us. No, Lance said, pulling a knife from his belt. It makes me better. Because I'm killing monsters to protect innocent people. You killed innocent people to protect monsters. Candace was sobbing now. Please, Lance. I know I don't deserve it, but please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lance looked at the woman he'd loved for 22 years, the mother of his child, the person he'd trusted above all others. She'd betrayed him in every way possible, but seeing her break down like this still caused him pain. I know you are, he said gently. But sorry doesn't bring back the people you helped kill. Sorry doesn't give Isabel her childhood back. Sorry doesn't undo 5 years of hell. What about mercy? Candace whispered. Lance smiled sadly. I'm going to make it quick. That's all the mercy you've earned. He started with Byron. Chapter 7, Cleanup. Lance had always been methodical about cleaning up construction sites. Tools returned to their proper places, debris properly disposed of, work areas left spotless for the next day. The same principles applied to other kinds of cleanup, though the disposal methods were necessarily different. Byron's lake house was isolated enough that the sound of power tools wouldn't draw attention. Lance had brought his portable circular saw, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, and a cooler full of ice. Byron had been thoughtful enough to install a deep freezer in the basement, presumably for storing fish from his weekend excursions, though Lance suspected it might have served other purposes. The hardest part wasn't the physical work. Lance had butchered deer for 20 years, and human anatomy wasn't that different. The hardest part was staying focused while his mind kept drifting to Isabel waiting in the truck. His daughter had seen enough violence for one lifetime. She didn't need to know the details of what he was doing inside. By 3 a.m., the house was clean. Byron and Candace had been reduced to manageable pieces and secured in heavy contractor bags. Lance had scrubbed every surface with bleach, vacuumed thoroughly, and used a UV light to check for blood traces. The basement freezer now contained 2 fewer recreational fishermen than it had before. He found Isabel asleep in the passenger seat of his truck, her camera equipment carefully secured in her lap. She looked younger in sleep, more like the teenager who'd disappeared 5 years ago. But even unconscious, she held herself with a wariness that broke Lance's heart. "It's done," he said gently, starting the engine. Isabel opened her eyes immediately, another survival skill she'd learned during her exile. "Are they? They won't hurt anyone else." Isabel nodded and settled back in her seat. She didn't ask for details, and Lance didn't offer any. Some conversations could wait for daylight. They drove in comfortable silence toward the small motel where Isabel had been staying since her return. It was the kind of place that took cash and didn't ask questions, perfect for someone who'd spent 5 years living off the grid. "What happens now?" Isabel asked as they pulled into the parking lot. "Now we wait," Lance said. "Byron and Candace are going to be missing for a while before anyone notices. When they are reported missing, the police will investigate. They'll find the house cleaned out, bank accounts emptied, passport activity. It'll look like they ran away together. You think it'll work?" "I think people see what they expect to see. An insurance executive involved in fraud, running away with his girlfriend when the investigation gets too close? That's a story that makes sense." Isabel was quiet for a moment. "What about us? What about our story?" Lance turned to face her. "What do you want our story to be?" "I want to come home," Isabel said simply. "I want to have a life. A real life. Not hiding and running and looking over my shoulder." "Then that's what we'll do. You'll move back into your room. We'll tell people you've been staying with relatives, trying to work through some problems. Anyone who asks too many questions gets the truth, that you're a young woman who needed time to find herself. And the video evidence. Insurance. If anyone ever comes looking for Byron and Candace, if anyone suggests we might know something about their disappearance, we have proof of what they were really doing." Isabel nodded slowly. "You've thought this through. I've had 5 years to think about what I'd do if I ever found the people who took you away from me." They sat in the truck for a few more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Isabel gathered her equipment and prepared to get out. "Dad," she said, her hand on the door handle. "Yeah. What you did tonight. I know it was for me, to protect me, but I need you to know that I'm not a victim anymore. I haven't been for a long time." Lance studied his daughter's face in the dashboard light. "I know. I can see that. I chose to come back. I chose to help you tonight. Whatever happens next, I chose it too." "I understand." Isabel smiled, the first genuine smile Lance had seen from her since her return. "Good. Because I've got some ideas about what we should do with Byron's money." Lance raised an eyebrow. "His money? He's got offshore accounts worth millions. Ill-gotten gains from years of insurance fraud. I've been tracking his financial network for 2 years, learning how he moves money around. And I think Dennis Elliott's family deserves compensation for their loss. Pete Kruger's family too. Maybe some of the insurance claimants Byron denied over the years." Lance felt that surge of pride again. His daughter hadn't just survived her exile. She'd used the time to become someone formidable. Someone who thought about justice in larger terms than personal revenge. "That sounds like a good use for dirty money," he agreed. "There's enough to help a lot of people. Maybe start a foundation. Help other victims of insurance fraud. Using a dead man's stolen money to help his victims. Byron would hate that." Isabel's smile turned sharp. "That's the idea." Lance laughed, the first time he'd laughed in 5 years. "I missed you, kiddo. I missed you too, Dad. More than you know." They hugged across the truck's center console, a father and daughter reunited by violence, but bonded by something stronger. Love, maybe. Or justice. Or simply the understanding that some wrongs could only be balanced by taking matters into your own hands. As Isabel walked toward her motel room, Lance allowed himself to feel something he'd forgotten was possible: hope. His family had been broken by evil men, but it wasn't destroyed. His daughter was home, his enemies were dead, and tomorrow they would begin building something new from the rubble of their old life. The demolition was complete. Now it was time to start construction. Chapter 8. New Foundations. 3 months later, Lance stood in his backyard watching Isabel plant a vegetable garden where Candace's rose bushes used to grow. His daughter moved with confident efficiency, her hands steady as she worked the soil. She'd put on weight since coming home, lost the hollow-eyed look of someone perpetually running. Isabel Morales, she'd legally changed her name, keeping only the surname she'd used during her exile, was building a life instead of merely surviving one. The official story had held up perfectly. Byron Weiss and Candace Daly had disappeared on the same night, along with nearly $3 million from various offshore accounts. The FBI's investigation focused on international flight patterns and banking records, tracking a phantom couple who existed only in carefully planted digital breadcrumbs. Lance had been questioned twice, perfunctory interviews where he played the role of betrayed husband, angry but not dangerous, more interested in divorce proceedings than revenge. The insurance industry's internal investigation was more thorough, but it led in expected directions. Byron's fraudulent claims stretching back 7 years, Candace's complicity in processing illegal payouts, a criminal enterprise that had stolen millions before collapsing under its own weight. Several of Byron's clients had been arrested. The company had quietly settled wrongful denial claims worth 8 figures. None of it touched Lance or Isabel. "Dad," Isabel called from the garden. "Come help me with this trellis." Lance set down his coffee and joined her in the dirt. They worked together silently, father and daughter building something that would grow and flourish instead of something designed for destruction. It felt good to use his hands for creation again. "I got confirmation from the bank today," Isabel said as they secured the wooden framework. Dennis Elliott's family received their settlement. $200,000 from an anonymous insurance industry whistleblower. "How did they take it?" His widow cried on the phone. She's been struggling to pay off medical bills from his cancer treatment. The insurance company denied most of the claims after he died, said his policy had lapsed. Lance felt that familiar cold anger, but it was manageable now. Focused. Byron's final gift to his victims. Pete Kruger's family got theirs too. They're using it to start a scholarship fund in his name. Isabel had spent the past 3 months systematically identifying Byron's victims and channeling his stolen money back to them through anonymous transfers. She'd established a foundation called the Elliott Kruger Justice Fund, ostensibly funded by recovered assets from insurance fraud investigations. The paperwork was complex enough to satisfy auditors, but vague enough to protect its true source. "Anyone getting suspicious about the sudden windfall of justice?" Lance asked. "The opposite. The insurance industry is taking credit for the recoveries. They're claiming it shows their commitment to rooting out fraud and helping victims." Isabel smiled grimly. "They're even using it in their marketing." Byron really would hate that. They finished the trellis and moved to the patio Lance had built the previous weekend. Isabel had insisted on outdoor furniture. She'd spent too many years confined to small spaces to enjoy being inside all the time. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the maple trees Lance had planted when Isabel was 5. "I've been thinking about the future," Isabel said eventually. "What kind of future?" "I want to go back to school. Finish my degree. Maybe study criminology or forensic accounting." Lance nodded. "Sounds like a good fit for someone with your skills. I was thinking I could specialize in insurance fraud investigation. Help the Elliott Kruger Foundation expand its work. From victim to victimizer to victim advocate. That's quite a journey." Isabel laughed, and the sound was lighter than Lance had heard in years. "I prefer to think of it as evolution. Using what I learned during the worst time of my life to help other people." They talked about practical matters, which schools to apply to, how to explain the gap in her education, whether her new identity would create complications. Isabel had thought through most of the challenges already, another sign of how thoroughly she'd prepared for this new life. As darkness fell, Lance found himself thinking about Candace for the first time in weeks. Not with anger or regret, but with a kind of distant curiosity. Had she ever imagined it would end this way? Had she thought about Isabel during those 5 years, wondered where her daughter was and whether she was safe? Or had Candace been so consumed by her affair and its consequences that she'd pushed aside maternal instinct entirely? "Do you ever think about Mom?" Isabel asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Sometimes." "Do you?" "I try not to. But sometimes I remember good things from before. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, the way she used to read to me when I was little." "She wasn't always what she became," Lance said carefully. "People change. Sometimes they change into things we don't recognize." "Do you think she ever loved us? Really loved us?" Lance considered the question seriously. "I think she loved the idea of us. The perfect family, the successful husband, the beautiful daughter. But when real life got complicated, when she had to choose between doing right and doing easy, she chose easy. And Byron was the easy choice. Byron was exciting. Dangerous. He made her feel special in a way that 20 years of marriage couldn't anymore. Isabel was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad she's gone," she said finally. "I know that makes me a terrible person, but I'm glad." "It doesn't make you terrible. It makes you honest. I used to have nightmares about her finding me, coming to wherever I was hiding and dragging me back to face what I'd seen. Sometimes the nightmares were worse than the memories." Lance reached over and took his daughter's hand. "She can't hurt you anymore. Neither of them can. I know. It's hard to believe sometimes. That they're really gone. That this is really over. It's over. We made sure of that." They sat holding hands until the mosquitoes drove them inside. Isabel heated up leftover pizza while Lance checked the locks and set the security system. Habits from the past 3 months that had become routine. They were safe now, but vigilance was a hard habit to break. "I had a thought about the foundation," Isabel said as they ate. "What if we expanded beyond just insurance fraud? There are other kinds of financial crimes that hurt regular people. Predatory lending, credit card scams, investment fraud. That's a lot of bad guys to go after." "The world's full of bad guys, Dad. But it's also full of people who got hurt because they trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. People like Dennis's widow, who lost her house because an insurance company wouldn't honor her husband's policy." Lance studied his daughter's face. She'd inherited his methodical nature and his sense of justice, but there was something else there too. A hardness that came from experience, from understanding that sometimes the only way to stop monsters was to become something monstrous yourself. "You want to make this a career," he said. "Hunting predators. I want to make sure what happened to our family doesn't happen to other families. And when it does happen, I want to make sure the victims have somewhere to turn for real help, even if that help involves questionable methods." Isabel's smile was sharp as a blade. "Especially then." Lance raised his beer bottle in a mock toast. "To questionable methods and just outcomes. To making the bastards pay," Isabel replied, clinking her bottle against his. Outside, the suburban street was quiet and peaceful. Children rode bikes on sidewalks, neighbors chatted over fences, families gathered around dinner tables. Normal people living normal lives, protected by laws and systems that usually worked. But Lance knew the truth about normal life. It was fragile, easily destroyed by people who operated outside the boundaries of law and conscience. When the systems failed, when the law couldn't reach the guilty, someone had to step into the darkness and balance the scales. Someone had to be willing to become the monster that hunted monsters. Lance and Isabel had found their calling. Chapter 9, Legacy. 1 year later, Lance stood in a downtown Minneapolis conference room listening to Maria Hoffman, Dennis Elliott's widow, address a gathering of insurance fraud victims. The Elliott Kruger Foundation had grown beyond Isabel's original vision, providing not just financial assistance, but legal advocacy, investigative support, and something more valuable than money: hope. "When my husband died, I thought his work died with him," Maria was saying. "Dennis spent his career fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The foundation has given his work new life, and given his death new meaning." The audience, 37 people whose lives had been shattered by insurance fraud, applauded with the fervor of believers. Lance recognized several faces from his and Isabel's private files. Sarah Chun, whose medical claim had been denied on fabricated grounds, leaving her family bankrupt. Tony Bowman, who'd lost his business when Byron's company refused to pay for legitimate fire damage. Marguerite Nolan, an elderly woman who'd been systematically defrauded by a network of unethical adjusters. All of them had received anonymous settlements. All of them believed their compensation had come from legitimate legal victories. None of them suspected that their justice had been purchased with the blood and money of their tormentors. Isabel took the podium next, introducing herself as the Foundation's Director of Special Investigations. She looked professional in her dark suit, confident in a way that made Lance's chest tight with pride. His daughter had built this organization from nothing, turning her trauma into a weapon against other people's trauma. The Elliott Kruger Foundation has recovered over $12 million for fraud victims in our first year, Isabel announced. We've provided legal assistance in 47 cases and investigative support in dozens more. But our real achievement isn't monetary. She gestured to the audience. Our real achievement is this room. These voices. These stories that might never have been told if Dennis Elliott and Pete Kruger hadn't been willing to risk their lives for the truth. More applause. Lance noticed several people wiping away tears. For them, this wasn't just about money. It was about validation, recognition, proof that their suffering mattered to someone. After the presentation, Lance and Isabel drove to their new office building, a converted warehouse in an up-and-coming neighborhood that attracted young professionals and nonprofit organizations. The Elliott Kruger Foundation occupied the entire second floor, with space for investigators, lawyers, victim advocates, and financial analysts. Not bad for a year's work, Lance said as they walked through the bustling workspace. It's just the beginning, Isabel replied. I've been tracking some interesting patterns in the data. Connections between seemingly unrelated fraud cases. I think we're looking at organized networks, not just individual bad actors. She led him to her office, a surprisingly modest space considering she controlled a multi-million-dollar operation. The walls were covered with flowcharts, photographs, newspaper clippings, and maps marked with colored pins. It looked like the workspace of someone hunting serial killers rather than financial criminals. Show me, Lance said. Isabel pulled up a digital presentation on her computer. Remember Stuart McCarthy? The adjuster who denied Sarah Chen's medical claims. Byron's old buddy from the regional office. Right. Well, Stuart's been busy since Byron disappeared. He's processed over 200 claim denials in the past year, all involving cancer patients or families with disabled children. Lance studied the screen, targeting the most vulnerable victims. Exactly. People who are too sick or too overwhelmed to fight back effectively. But here's the interesting part. Stuart's not working alone. The presentation shifted to show a network diagram. I've identified at least 6 adjusters working in coordination across 3 different insurance companies. They share client information, coordinate denials to avoid patterns, and split the savings bonuses. A conspiracy. A well-organized one. They've stolen millions from families facing medical emergencies, and they've done it systematically enough to avoid detection. Lance felt that familiar cold anger building. What do you want to do about it? Isabel's smile was predatory. I want to destroy them. All of them. Completely. She pulled up another file. Stuart's the key. He coordinates the network, handles the most sensitive cases, and he's got a weakness we can exploit. Which is, he's got a gambling problem. Owes money to some very unpleasant people. Money that comes due next month. Lance nodded slowly. And I think Stuart might be interested in a proposition. A way to pay off his debts and start fresh somewhere else. In exchange for everything. Names, methods, financial records, client lists. Complete documentation of the fraud network. And after he gives you everything? Isabel's expression didn't change. After that, Stuart will discover that running away from gambling debts is harder than he thought. Lance studied his daughter's face, looking for signs of the traumatized teenager who'd fled this city 5 years ago. She was gone completely, replaced by someone harder and more focused. Someone who understood that justice sometimes required methods the law couldn't sanction. You're talking about a coordinated takedown of 6 people, Lance said. I'm talking about stopping a network that's stealing from cancer patients and disabled children. The methods are whatever they need to be. And if some of them end up like Byron and Candace, then they end up like Byron and Candace. Lance was quiet for a long moment. His daughter had crossed lines that most people couldn't even see, had become someone capable of planning and executing complex revenge schemes that bordered on the sociopathic. But she was using those skills to protect innocent people from predators who operated with impunity. What do you need from me? He asked. I need you to be my partner. Officially this time. The foundation is hiring a new director of security and special operations. I don't know anything about insurance law. You know about construction, planning, project management, resource allocation. Isabel's smile softened. And you know about taking care of problems that can't be solved through normal channels. Lance thought about his life before Isabel's return. Empty days spent maintaining a house that had felt like a tomb. Sleepless nights wondering if his daughter was alive or dead. The slow-burning rage that had threatened to consume him entirely. Now he had purpose. He had family. He had meaningful work that made the world incrementally less evil. When do I start? He asked. You already did. The day you walked into Byron's house and decided some crimes deserve personal attention. They worked until late evening, planning their approach to Stuart McCarthy and his network. Isabel had been tracking the group for months, building comprehensive profiles, identifying vulnerabilities and pressure points. By the time they left the office, they had a detailed strategy that would systematically destroy 6 people's lives while providing justice for hundreds of their victims. As they walked to their cars, Lance felt something he hadn't experienced since Isabel's return: complete satisfaction. His daughter was home, his enemies were dead, and he had meaningful work that used every skill he'd learned during 48 years of life. "Dad," Isabel said as they reached the parking garage, "I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm proud of us. Of what we've built, what we've accomplished. 5 years ago, I thought my life was over. Now I think it's just beginning." Lance pulled his daughter into a hug. This remarkable young woman who'd survived trauma that would have broken most people and emerged stronger than she'd ever been. "I'm proud of us too," he said. "And I'm proud of what we're going to do next." They drove home through the Minneapolis night, father and daughter united by blood and purpose and the understanding that some kinds of justice required getting your hands dirty. The Elliott Kruger Foundation would continue its official work: legal advocacy, financial assistance, public education about insurance fraud. But its real work, its most important work, would happen in the shadows, where predators learned that their victims weren't as helpless as they'd assumed, where people who profited from suffering discovered that suffering was a two-way street, where monsters found out what it felt like to be hunted. Lance and Isabel had found their calling. They would be the darkness that hunted darkness, the violence that protected the innocent, the justice that operated beyond the reach of law. They would be what the world needed them to be, and they would never stop. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.